Hey, welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're going to tackle a really big idea, one that most of us just kind of accept as true, that science and faith are and always have been locked in this epic battle. But what if that whole story isn't quite right? What if it's not even true at all? Let's start with this really provocative thought from Jordan Peterson. He's basically suggesting that this huge conflict we all assume exists between science and religion, well, maybe it's not some timeless truth. Maybe it was more like a really successful PR campaign from a few hundred years ago. You know the story we're always told, right? It's pretty simple. Science lives in the world of cold, hard facts. Religion lives in the world of, subjective faith. They're painted as these two totally separate, incompatible domains. One is all about proof, the other, pure belief. Case closed. But hang on, let's look a little closer. 'Cause what if science itself, the very thing we champion for its logic and evidence, what if it's also built on a foundation of faith? Now, I don't mean faith in God necessarily. I mean faith in a set of core, unprovable assumptions, you could call them axioms, that you just have to accept as true before you can even run a single experiment. Okay, so let's really get into this, because this is where the whole story flips on its head. The argument from our source material is that, far from being enemies, some very specific religious beliefs were actually the necessary ingredients, the preconditions, really, for modern science to even get off the ground in the first place. The writer C.S. Lewis just nails this idea. He argued that the most fundamental assumption of science, that the universe is orderly, that it follows predictable laws, that it's not just random chaos, that idea didn't just pop out of nowhere. It was born from a very specific worldview, one that believed in a rational creator who had built that same rationality and order right into the fabric of the universe. So here's the crucial point. Science basically runs on at least three core articles of faith. First, you have to believe, on faith, that the universe makes sense and that our little human minds can actually figure it out. Second, you have to believe that figuring it out is a good thing to do, that it's a worthwhile, even moral quest. And third, you have to commit to the truth, wherever it leads, believing that that is the ultimate good, even if it completely wrecks your favorite theory. See, none of these can be proven by science. You have to accept them before you even start. And, it actually goes even deeper than those foundational beliefs. The day-to-day practice of science isn't some cold, robotic number crunching. It's a deeply ethical activity that actually requires a certain kind of person, a certain kind of character to do it right. In other words, being a good scientist isn't just about the facts you have memorized. It's about how you behave. It's a whole way of being in the world, one that is just saturated with moral decisions at every single turn. And this is what really sets apart the best researchers. They live by this kind of code. Be generous. Share your ideas. Give credit where it's due. Be brutally honest with your data, especially when you really wanted to say something else. And maybe the hardest one, be humble enough to admit you were wrong. That's not just a method, it's a moral framework. I mean, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman just captured this ethical core perfectly. Think about that quote. That's not a scientific formula, it's a moral warning. The whole project of science depends on this relentless, difficult commitment to self-honesty. And all of this leads us to one of the scariest challenges we face today. What happens when our scientific power, our ability to do things, starts to run way ahead of our ethical wisdom about what we should do? You can find this idea all the way back in the book of Genesis. It's the original temptation, right? You shall be as gods. It's this deep, prideful belief that we don't have to discover what's good or evil. We can just define it ourselves, that there are no moral laws we have to follow outside of what we want. And what's so fascinating is how this ancient idea is popping up again in a super high-tech costume. Think about some of the goals of a movement like transhumanism. To solve death, like it's just a technical glitch, to literally bioengineer happiness. It's the exact same ambition, to overcome every natural limit and become the complete masters of our own destiny. Decades ago, C.S. Lewis saw this exact danger coming. He warned that in our relentless drive to conquer and control everything in nature, the final thing we would try to conquer would be our own human nature. And in doing so, we'd end up redefining ourselves into something completely new, essentially abolishing what it even means to be human. So this all brings us to a really fundamental question. If science rests on this deep moral foundation, What happens when we try to use all its incredible power, but without any source of wisdom to guide us? This is a pretty deep philosophical problem for a purely materialist view of the world. Philosopher John Lennox puts it perfectly. Imagine you knew your computer was just the random result of a mindless process. Would you trust anything it calculates? Well, if our brains are the same thing, why on earth should we trust the thoughts they produce, including the thought that materialism itself is true? And this really illustrates the final choice we're facing. It's a choice between two paths. Do we pursue wisdom, which means accepting that there are limits and always asking, what is the right thing to do? Or do we just chase raw, unrestrained power, which only ever asks what is technically possible? One path is grounded in an ethical tradition. The other, well, it's forced to just make up its values as it goes along. So ultimately, we're left with this critical question for our time. Maybe the biggest challenge ahead of us isn't about the limits of our science, but about the source of our wisdom. Because in a world where it feels like we can do anything, the most important question of all might be, where do we find the clarity and the moral courage to decide what we shouldn't?